Welcome to the Teens Behind the Scenes webinar series. My name is Lindsey R. Barr, one of the dramaturgs for the program. Teens Behind the Scenes is a program of the National Theater Foundation dedicated to providing teens in the Washington, D.C. area with access to Broadway touring productions and professional insight into performing arts careers. In this series, we interview emerging and leading theater professionals to learn more about what they do, how they do it, and how they got to where they are. Joining me today is Nikki Mirza. Nikki Mirza, she, her, is a South Asian American multidisciplinary artist originally from California and now based right here in the Washington, D.C. area. Her experience as a creative team member and performer deeply influences her artistry. Movement is a core tenet of her style, so she explores imaginative, physical storytelling. Nikki has collaborated regionally with La Jolla Playhouse, Signature Theater, Olney Theater Center, Roundhouse Theater, Theater J, Imagination Stage, Good Speed Opera House, and more. She has a passion for youth and the arts, having worked many theater for young audience contracts, as well as in the entertainment department at Legoland, California. She's an adjunct dance faculty member at the Catholic University of America and American University, having choreographed and directed musicals there this season. She was selected as a 2024 local theater artist in residence at the Kennedy Center for her play, This Play Isn't About Brian, where she had the opportunity to workshop and develop the piece. She is currently an inaugural member of First Stage's Director's Residency and Commission Program. Thanks so much for being here, Nikki.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
So we just heard all about your excellent bio and all of the many things that you've done, but I'm just curious if you can tell us a little bit more about yourself. Maybe it's more about your artistry, maybe it's more about how you got to directing. I'm just curious of what makes Nikki the artist that you are.
Yeah, so I probably had my first directing experience in high school without realizing it was a directing experience. There's this pa male pageant that is done called Mr. Brea in high school, and it's kind of like a comedy sketch thing for guys, and someone gets to be like the entertainment chair in the student body and put on the presentation of it. And I was in charge of it. And so I don't think I realized that I was directing at that time. I was just kind of like doing all the things. But then the first time I really directed in the context of musical theater was my senior year of college. And I think there were different performing experiences and leadership experiences and that Mr. Brea High School experience that brought me to that moment where I had just been performing and my friends were like, you should direct. And I was like, what? I don't know. I don't know if I should direct. And what does that even mean? They're like, you should do it. And then I just started having a vision for the show Spring Awakening. And I decided to pitch myself as the director for it and did the interview and got it. And so my senior year of college, I got to direct Spring Awakening. And a huge component of that production was incorporating a lyrical dance ensemble to physicalize the emotions of the characters. A lot of the songs are very poetic. And so I knew my general audience was students and not musical theater students because it was a separate organization that we were a part of that put on like shows for the whole school, not necessarily through their theater program. So it's like, what is a way that can make this like really accessible and tangible for people that don't know anything about Spring Awakening? And I got to partner with resource centers on campus because a lot of the content in Spring Awakening is really sensitive and there's some serious themes that it explores. And I wanted to make sure that we beyond just like the dramaturgy, we also had like partnerships and community resources for our company, but also for anyone that was coming in to see the show. And so that was a really unique opportunity in being on a college campus to kind of see the ways that directing you can like you have your space that you're cultivating in the rehearsal room in the process with your artists and your designers, but then it really also tied into the ways that it was like bleeding out into the community and rippling through. So I think that was like really what my first experience and excitement was with directing. That from there, I had a lot of opportunities to assistant direct. And there's different pathways for directing. So some people are like, yes, you assistant direct and you learn and then you go from there. And for me, that just was an opportunity that presented itself, but it's not by any means the only way. Some people are like, I will never assistant direct. I found it really helpful because it helps me as a young artist connect with theaters and build relationships with people. And so much of our industry is about building those relationships and establishing trust with one another. And that's something that has to be built. It can't just be like given to you freely. We want to know that we can trust the people we're working with. And so I had the opportunity to really get to know people, and this was all in California. And from there, I also have been doing some choreography. And so, as a choreographer, that also has gotten me into the room and working with directors. And I frequently get to choreograph for artistic directors of theaters. That's just like how it's worked out that the artistic director of a theater will be directing a show, and I end up choreographing for them as a play or a musical. And then that also helps establish more of a relationship, and they get to know me, and then they get to know me as a director. And that's kind of opened up doors to directing as well. So that's a little bit about my journey.
Yeah. No, I'm loving how you're talking about sort of using opportunities to connect with people, but then also using opportunities to learn more to then take into your own practice, whether that's like assistant directing or just like being in the room. And so I'm wondering if like super baseline, like if we take all the steps back of like, how do you find directing? Like, what is your job when you are being asked to direct a production? What does that mean?
I think it means creating a welcoming, joy-centered environment. That's really important to me, that you are the leader, bringing people together from so many different avenues. You have stage management, you have actors, you have designers, you have crew, and you are a part of really establishing what the environment is. And then once you've established an environment that is built on respect, joy, grace, then that creates a foundation and a playground to create together. And without that as the foundation, your creativity can't flourish. And so I think for me as a director, then once you have that established, you come in with a vision for the show, and you are in charge of helping everyone collaborate on that vision. But if there's too many, it's such a balance, because if there's too many cooks in the kitchen, we all have such great ideas. And if we're all throwing ideas, you have to also be the one that's like, let me take all the spaghetti, throw it at the wall, and see what sticks. And so another part of directing too is being the one that can really like help us focus on the North Star that is telling our story for this specific production you're working on, and kind of take that melting pot of ideas and make sure we're streamlining it and having that focus.
Yeah, that's super helpful. I really appreciate how you're talking about the director as like the North Star, right? Because it's like pointing us in a direction while acknowledging all the other pieces that have to be in play. But
Yeah.
someone has to make the big decisions, right? And
Yeah, and
that's
I don't
like
think
the
the
director.
director is the North Star, but the director is the one with the map that can like,
Yes.
guide us to the North Star and make sure
Yeah.
that we're staying on track with the map. And that sometimes it's fun to take some detours, but are we still going in the direction that we need to be going in to tell the
Yeah.
story?
Well, it's such a brilliant way to put it. Of like the director has the map.
Yeah.
I am curious if
And the director might not always know how to read the map, which is why there's other artists of like, why, where do we go right here? I know that's where we need to go, but what are we missing about how to get over this roadblock? And having other artists as well being able to like help like collaborate and contribute to get us in the direction and on the path that we need to be on.
yeah, I'm really sitting with this metaphor because I think that I mean the word director suggests like a decision maker, right? But what you're talking about is helping make sense of all of the expertise in the room in service of the production, right? Like you're the one helping us, like, what does this world want to be? How do all these pieces fit together? And collaborating with lots of other people to make that happen. And that feels like a really collaborative, community centric approach to directing.
Yeah, and that's really important to me because I think that, you know, as a director, you have to have if you but it's like a flip side, right? I can't come in and be like, "What do we think this is?" Like, let's just figure it out. Then everyone's gonna be like, "I can't trust you. You're supposed to be telling us like where we're going with this." So I think like for Spring Awakening, I came in and I had a very clear specific vision where I was like, we have this lyrical on dance ensemble that's like a chorus of subconscious storytellers, and we're going to be using this kind of style and the way we tell this story, and this is the heart and the focus. And now let's all like put pieces together that how we can keep building upon that. And so bringing in collaborators who align with that vision, are excited about that vision, and keep building towards that vision. And so I think that's really important too, to come in with that. But if you're just the director that comes in and is like, you stand here, you go there, you move here, you are my puppets. I want you to do this exact acting beat. Then that's really undermining the skills and talents of the artist that you're working with. Actors have so many great ideas, and you can see, like, I think that this is like the vision of the scene. And then an actor is like, oh, I was actually thinking about this part of my character. And what if she feels this in this way? And then it's like, okay, let's try that. So, like, being able to also create a space for like trying things that maybe weren't how you envisioned it as you were going through the script, and having different tactics and beats that the actors discover too, and ideas. Actors are so smart and brilliant and fun. And when you're on your feet in a space together, you can't just puppet people around. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And so I'm curious if you're talking about beats, you're talking about thinking about the visual structure of the piece. When someone asks you to be a director, when they say like, "Hey, Nikki, do you want to work on this project?" and you say, "Yes, I want to work on the project." What do you do? Like, what is the first thing you do to jump into a directing process?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I spend a lot of time in the script. So I'll read the script. I usually like to read it once and like not be whole. I'm not hold a pen. Like I just want to read through it. I don't want to make any marks or notes and stuff. I just want to digest it. So I'll usually read through it. And then when I go through it another time is when I start kind of like circling maybe some context. So if I'm like, okay, this is the setting. Oh, they're saying it's cold out, it's warm out. Like I'm trying to understand like what the physical world of the play is. And then also certain characteristics. So I start, it's just like script analysis. Even, as high school students, there's different essay analysis that you have to do. It's just kind of taking a text and reading it and taking in all the information that's going to help you build the world. Like, okay, is it in the winter time? Where in the winter? California winter is a lot different than Wisconsin winter. And that tells me a lot about what the environment is like. And then also getting into, so once I have kind of a lay of the like surface level things, that kind of helps me then dig deeper into some of the story beats. And so when you're seeing like, when does something shift for a character? What are their wants and desires? So you build the given circumstances and then getting a little bit more into like the character's drive and getting to know these characters. It helps to also, like write out like who these characters are and what are they feeling and what are they desiring, because as an actor you're like, okay, this is my character, I focus on this person and these are their circumstances, these are their relationships. But when you're the director, you kind of need to be in the brains of every single character. And so being able to do what if some of you are actors, like what do you do then actually as a director is like taking that approach and building it into the multiple different characters in the play.
Yeah, I wish I could have you in my dramaturgy class when we're doing our script analysis unit because I gave them, but what you're speaking to is like the work that so many theater artists do in different ways, right? Which is like, I have my students do literally like a 4-page script analysis of like, what is the weather? What does the world look like? What do these people wear, right? What are the social circumstances of the world? What are the economic circumstances of the world, right? Like that tells us so much about not only where the play sits, but how the characters sit in that world, right? Which feels like a really important preoccupation for the director to have.
Yeah. And then when I go to talk to designers, which is usually the next step of building your team, you build your designers, and that gives me a lot of information to then approach those conversations. Where if I'm talking to the scenic designer about building the world, or the costume designer and it's winter time, like there's so much more of like class, weather, like all the deep things, and this, I'm calling them like surface level things like weather or something, but stuff that just like is environmental and informative. It really helps you then build upon those conversations with designer and have more in-depth perspective as you approach the work and the characters, and also allows you to add some more metaphorical choices to some of the design elements, which I really enjoy.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you can talk a little, because you're moving us into design, which I think is a really natural, great segue of thinking about when you're reading the script, you're doing a really basic script analysis of like what is happening in the world. When in your brain do you start to see that world being fleshed out? Like, is it on first reading, you're already imagining what this could look like? Or is it after talking to designers? Like, I'm just so curious how you work through that process.
Yeah, I tend to start envisioning things very early. And so I actually really practiced trying to tell myself, like, pump the brakes a bit, try to be in the text, because then I'm like, oh, wait, what if this transition was like this? And I'm like, okay, I'm getting into the vision, but I still need to like stay in this moment in the story part of the world. And I think that's also the choreographer in me because I see like stage pictures and how things can be smooth. And you saw my production of 9 to 5. One thing that I really cared about was making sure there was not too many just like blackout, wait for the transition to happen unless it was necessary. I was like, how can we be storytelling throughout the entire process and go from one thing to the next? In really creative and fun ways for the audience. And so something that I do as a director is try to really like also make sure that I pump the brakes a bit before I get to that point. But sometimes it's difficult to envision what the world is if it's not specific. And so if you're setting something like even 9 to 5, where it's like it says that it's in an office and then it says it goes to a basement. Like it gives you the vocabulary of where exactly you should be. And then a show I directed earlier this year was Constellations, and it's a two-person play that has no real specific setting. And so it does where you're like, okay, we're implying that we are at a barbecue, so maybe, in someone's backyard, but then all of a sudden we're having this conflict. So we're in their apartment, but it keeps transforming in a way that is not calling for a realism in the scenic design. And so sometimes something like that and envisioning what the world is can be harder when you're like, okay, so then what is my specific take on it, where something like 9 to 5 kind of hands that to you.
Yeah. And I want to jump to your mention of being a choreographer because I wonder if there's overlap here and how you're talking about stage pictures and you're talking about bodies in relationship to each other on
Yeah.
stage, which feels like a really important piece of choreographing, but also a really important piece of directing. So I'm wondering if you can talk about how your work and experience as a choreographer and performer influences how you approach directing and vice versa, frankly. Like, how does directing impact your choreography?
I think it just widens my perspective and it helps me to see theater from a holistic lens. And when I am a performer and I'm working with a director, sometimes I can see things that I'm like, oh, I understand why you're doing this. Or then when I'm a director and I see a performer being a certain way, I'm like, oh, okay, I can understand why you're doing this. Or as a choreographer, and especially like marrying the director choreographer title, it just really helps me see shapes in the ways that people can physically connect with one another. And specifically like beyond realism. Like I really like going into some interpretive movement and allowing there to be space that goes beyond just like physical connection in the real world. So what I mean by that is like in Constellations, there's this moment of they say each time the scene switches, they're getting more and more intoxicated. And I was like, oh, how can I like show that rather than the actors just all of a sudden switching and being like, no, I'm more drunk. I'm sorry, I'm talking about alcohol in a, a high school sense, but in that, I was like, what if I added something that was like a physical moment that was capturing like a cheers of a glass and a spin and drinking more of their glass. And so it was kind of this hyper theatrical moment that happened multiple times to signify that they were drinking more throughout each scene. And so I really like doing that where like that's not on the page. And I was like, oh, but like my choreographer brain, even though I'm a director and this is a play and there's no dance in it, like the way my style is to just add some like heightened movement that communicates something that us as an audience can understand. There was also like this setting in a dance studio in that play, but there wasn't like true dance. And I was like, but how can people not dance, but still connect with each other in a way that feels heightened? And if we just have a soundscape for a moment and a breath and have like a physical vocabulary to show how these two actors or characters are relating in space to one another, like I think there can be such beauty to explore things beyond just the text.
Yeah, and I love that you're bringing up Constellations because for people who don't know, Constellations can be a tricky play to read and I imagine to direct at the same time because it's a play that sort of scenes replay themselves sometimes to different outcomes and sometimes to the same out. Like it's a puzzle to put together. And so when you get a script like, I mean, 9 to 5, to your point, feels like this is the story. It's pretty straightforward. It's very chronological and linear, and we get from point A to point B. Um, but there are lots of plays like Constellation where the journey from beginning to end is less clear or takes more paths, takes diverges in lots of different ways. And so I'm wondering if you can talk to me about, do you have different approaches when you approach something like a realistic piece like 9 to 5 versus something that might be a little more metaphorical or absurdist, even? In, not that I think Constellation is absurdist, but you get what I'm saying, right? Like less strictly structured chronologically. Like, is your approach the same there? Do you think about them differently? How do you handle that?
I think there are a lot of similarities in the approach, but it probably just takes a little bit more of the like script analysis, like brain breaking moments where you're just like, I need to sit with this a little bit longer to really unlock like what we want out of this. But in some ways, it doing a show like Constellations that repeats, it feels like a Meisner acting exercise where you're just like, okay, I want this one thing, but then it's shifted a little bit, and I want this one thing. And so they're like the wants shift or it's yeah, so in some ways it's interesting where it feels like there's almost more clarity in that because it's like short scenes being shifted a little bit where it over an overarching arc over I said that a lot, but um and I think I do really just approach it in similar ways of just like spending time deep in the text. And sometimes you get more time because you're also not balancing like music rehearsals and choreography rehearsals. Like for a play, you're like, oh, I almost have more time to unpack this because there aren't all those other elements in the ways that a musical demands. So I think they are similar and just require a lot of like communication and read throughs. And I love bringing on assistant directors and collaborating with them. And so open communication and collaborating and usually like timelines really help me. I try to like build a map. So even I was using this like metaphor of a map, but I sometimes literally build a map that I can use and like have as a resource. And then I can share with designers as well to be like, okay, this is the map of where we're going. So we're all on the same page.
Mm-hmm. Well, hearing you say that, I have like 4 questions that came out of that. So I'll try to make
I was
them
like,
into
I feel like
something.
I was a little like this, so I'm glad you followed.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you totally. And I have lots of questions. I'm curious if I'll start with this one. Is there, knowing that every directing process is different and unique because every play is different and unique, even 2 productions of the same play can be
Yeah.
wildly different. Um, is there a part of the directing process that you find most fulfilling? And are there parts of the directing process that you maybe don't dislike, but are parts of the process that don't excite you as much?
Mm. I think the process in the rehearsal space I love. I love being in the rehearsal room with actors and discovering and seeing and getting to celebrate the wins with them when they like sing that song and they finally like had like hit that note or when the dance break was like clean and slick. Like I just love getting to celebrate the growth of the rehearsal process and the journey of the rehearsal process and to just like create an environment of fun. Like I really, really strive in my artistry to create a room that is fun and that people want to show up to. And that no matter what is going on in your life and in your day, that you know you can come and just like be yourself and bring whatever self that is that day, but be cared for in that space and have a good time. And then the part of the process that maybe I feel like it doesn't excite me as much is once we get the part of being a director, especially through previews or something, is you watch the show so many times. And by opening as an actor, you're like, yes, it's open and it's just starting. And as a director, you're like, okay, like I have seen this a lot. Like we are good. And I go now. I don't come back after opening and maybe I can come see it again. But I think there's an element when you start to get into the grind of watching it over and over again that feels a little like difficult in certain ways. Because if you're seeing things that you're like, as an artist, you can enjoy it, but you're also watching it from a perspective of like note taking and what do we need to do better? What do we need to work on? How can we fix that sound? So you're just having to watch the same thing and make different adjustments. And then it's nice when opening happens and it's a little free. And then you come back to see it and you're like, oh, I can just like sit and enjoy it.
Yeah, that you're so naturally leading me to really great questions.
Oh,
So,
good.
my next question is like, okay, so you're the director, you've had a vision, you've communicated that with people, we've rehearsed the show, um, and we're in previews, right? So we've rehearsed the show, it's on a stage, we've run all the technical elements. We are now like a few days from opening previews, as you mentioned, right? So, what is your job? So we know on opening night you're going to open the show and be like, great work, everyone. We did it. What is it like in that preview section? You're mentioning watching the show for notes. What does that mean? What does that work look like for you when you're in this post rehearsal, pre opening, like sweet spot?
Yeah, so you usually go through tech first. And so that's when you're adding all the technical elements to the show, right? Costumes, lights, sound. And it's really important for me as I've been talking about like building a really fun room and process that all of my conversations with designers, well, individually production meetings have had that same heart and energy and spirit that I've brought into the rehearsal room. And so when those things get married together, tech, everyone's always like, tech is stressful. And if we're this and we're behind, and oh, then tensions can be high. And I'm like, my tech process, there will be moments of stress. We can't avoid that. Stressful things will happen, unexpected things will arise, but it's really about how we handle those situations and how we navigate them, and that we all continue to stay focused on the same goals. And so for me, it's really important that it's like, yes, let's acknowledge that those things will happen, but how are we going to handle it? We've built this foundation and we're going to keep using this mentality as we move forward and things potentially get more stressful. And so, as I'm bringing these different groups all together, I really make sure I still set that tone and that everyone feels like this is a place where there can be laughter at certain things. And one of my favorite things to do, like, I'll frequently also, if something is like a bad dance move that I've choreographed or a bad direction I've given that we don't know until we're seeing it in tech and stuff, I'll be like, yikes, who directed that? And I'll just like, that's like one of my catchphrases. I'll be like, who choreographed that? And it just kind of breaks the ice in a way to be like, we can all have moments of like, that wasn't our best. And like, that's okay. That doesn't mean we are not great. It just means like, okay, so maybe that wasn't great. Like, what else can we do? And so I try to like allow there to be space for people to feel like they can make mistakes. I make mistakes and to like vocally just like own those. I think helps because I don't demand or expect perfection from people. But anyways, to get more specific into what the process is. So in that tech environment, I think it's good to establish that. And so you tech the show and then you have previews where you're usually rehearsing in the daytime and performing in the evening. And so those are really long, exhausting days, which goes back to making sure that you have an environment that feels like it is supportive and that it is like joy centered. And because when patience is running low, we're exhausted, we're getting a lot of demands left and right. There's so much that's going on. So in that window, I think it's really important to find the ways to prioritize your notes. So if you're doing a show and there's maybe a scene that once it's staged, you're like, this actually, oh, a good example is in 9 to 5. There was a scene that we set in the office, the main office, at the end of the show that we realized we actually wanted to leave in Hart's office. So not like the big, everybody has desks, just his office. And I didn't realize that until like the like tech. And I was like, oof, because I was like, this transition is taking so long. And then everyone's awkwardly watching this really personal conversation. And it took me until then to be like, you know what? I think we need to make this change. Which in a college setting, you don't have previews, but that would be an example, which we just did in tech. But that would be an example in previews that you would see something and be like, we need to restage that. And so you would use the rehearsal time to restage that, fix lights into what needs to be fixed, and then try it in the evening and see if it worked. And so that's kind of what, and especially for a new musical, you might have a new song that the writers want to try that you'll put in. You might have scenes that you want to cut. I just saw senior class last night at Olney, and that's a brand new musical. And there were different things through previews that I know they were like making cuts of songs or scenes. And that's really the new, the new musical world and why previews and tech are important. And so you're making all those changes. You have notes that you're taking to then give to the actors about acting intentions, or the designers about, can this volume be louder? Can we get more light on this person? And then all those changes can be made, but once the show opens, that means it's frozen. And so when it's frozen, that means no more notes of lighting changes, no more notes of acting beat changes. It's like everything should stay the same, and any notes given from stage management are just to continue to preserve the show that we set at opening night.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I appreciate that you're talking about and you're dropping in conversations around like new play development processes, new
Yeah.
musical development processes, because, we've been talking largely about like, receiving a script that's already been written, you're working in the room to put it on its feet. But I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the differences between directing already published, established work where you are doing a lot of that world building and pointing us to the map. And how is that different than when you're working with a playwright or working on a brand new play that hasn't been produced before? What is the differences or similarities between that process?
Yeah, I love it. There's something so nice about being in a room and being like, "Oh, I have a question about this. What does this mean? Playwright, can you elaborate on this?" Like, it's not like that you just have to make up the answers. You can literally talk to the person. And if there's something that we discover is not working, you can actually have that conversation versus there's shows I've definitely directed that are, set, this is the script, this is what it is. And you're like, I just wish that maybe this moment was more this way, or there could have been this that happened, or blah, blah, blah. And it's like, but I just have to direct what it is and justify it and make it work. But when you work on a new work, there's so much that you can have conversations with, and to either give you more context to justify those moments, or that the playwright and you will have a great conversation. They'll be like, I'm going to go and do some rewrites and I'll come back. And so it feels very alive and it feels very malleable, which is so exciting, but can be overwhelming because similar, there's never enough time in theater. So even if I'm directing a show that like it exists, this is the script, I'm always like, tech, I wish I had another day of tech to then like finesse that lighting moment, or choreo another day to like do this, clean up this choreo for this piece. And with playwrights, it's like you're never done writing. You're like, oh, if I could have only written that thing a different way. So to some extent, like that is the curse. And as a playwright myself, I feel like there's times where I'm like, are the rewrites ever done? Like I feel like there's always something I want to change about my script. But I think there's something so exciting about the collaborative relationship with a playwright that I have had the fortune of working on multiple new works, and I absolutely love it and adore it.
Yeah, that's great. And I love that you're talking about how shows change over time, and how that process happens, because it is very different, but it takes a lot of the same skills to investigate those worlds, right? To make sense of them.
Yeah.
Um, you talked about yourself being an assistant director, and you've talked about working on processes where you've had an assistant director. And I gather that if there are students watching this webinar, that they might be interested in taking a similar path, right? Learning more about directing by being an assistant director. And so I'm curious if you can talk about generally, what do assistant directors do? What is their role on a show? And what are things that students could really look forward to learning or absorbing in your experience by being assistant directors?
Yeah, that's a great question. So every assistant director or associate director role I've had has been very different. And my first ones out of college was like, get me coffee, and I don't like your idea, but actually I'm going to take it and pretend that it was my idea. Like, I've definitely had those experiences, but then I've had amazing experiences where I've felt very like respected and included by the director. One of my favorite directors to work with is Amy Anders Corcoran, who just directed senior class at Olney Theater Center. And yeah, there's something in being an assistant director, something that's really important is remembering that you are supporting the director's vision. So, especially as an assistant director, you are an artist and you I'm sure have ideas and a vision. So even now, if I assistant and associate direct, I also direct my own work. And so having the space to also be like, but my goal right now is to support this person and to offer creative support. It's not just a clerical position, but no, being able to read a room and knowing when are times that are helpful to be like, I think I can help you problem solve this. I have an idea that might work for this. Or when are times that you're bringing up, what if we did this thing that actually distracts and makes it a little bit harder from the goal in the room in that moment? And so I think kind of having those just natural like observation people skills and being able to balance when to chime in and when to just wait to be and maybe bring something up later is really important. And that's something that's not, you can't really be taught. You just have to learn experientially, which is hard. Another thing is just a lot of organization. Being the center point of communication between designers, between stage management, between actors, and being able to have a good rapport with those people is really important. And because sometimes you're the one that's going to be like working a scene while the director is doing something else, and she's like, "Can you take those two actors and work on this note with them?" And so having a good rapport with the company in general is really helpful. And just being really good at spreadsheets, like making a great character tracking spreadsheet, making a really organized props list. There's a lot of just good emailing and things like that that help to be organized in that way. And sometimes assistant associate directors run understudy rehearsals. And so knowing the blocking is really important. Some directors want you to keep a blocking book and know all of their blocking. Even if the stage manager, it's their job to do that, they want the assistant director to do it as well. And sometimes, though, as an assistant director, there's a lack of communication from the director of what they want and just kind of an expectation that you know what they want or they'll tell you when the time comes. So the more that you can also ask questions before the process starts of like, what are ways I can support you? What are things that you need in the room? What are things you need outside of the room? What are the expectations? So you go into it more prepared. And sometimes there's times when you're in the room and you're like, I feel like I'm not doing anything. And then you're like, well, I'm just going to be on my laptop or on my phone or not paying attention. And then the director's like, okay, yeah. And so Nikki, can you do that? And then you're like, oh, was I? And I usually am pretty focused in the room, but I'm just saying this as an example. Like if you get distracted and then all of a sudden you don't know the second that you're actually going to be needed for something, or hey, that thing we did yesterday, can you run it in the other room? And if you were doing your own thing on your laptop and you have no idea what that thing was from yesterday because you thought you weren't needed, then that'll do a huge disservice. So a lot of it is also just being a sponge. And even if you feel like you're not being needed, you are being needed because there could be anything at any moment that arises, and you need to have all the information you can to best support the director.
So another really like highly collaborative space, it sounds like.
Yeah.
I, in hearing you say this, you mentioned so many things that are activated in being a director, so many skills, so many parts of your brain, it sounds like you need to activate. When you think about directing, what are skills or tools that you think make an effective director? And this can be from your own experience, or this can be from like you witnessing other people direct, because as you just mentioned, you've done that a lot. And so like what are the skills that make a strong director in your opinion, in your experience?
Strong vision. And I think some of the things I'm going to say are pretty basic, but I think I've definitely worked with directors that don't have a strong vision. And so then there's a lack of clarity amongst the company about what the vision is, and it feels disorganized in the storytelling. So I think a strong sense of vision and storytelling is really important. And I think just a really strong leader. And I don't mean that in the typical sense. I think a lot of different types of people are strong leaders, but an ability to s steer the room in a way that allows for creation to happen and that people feel free to create and feel to embarrass themselves because they, like when we were kids, we could just do something big and silly and it could be bad, but we feel the freedom to be like, let me just try something. And if I fall on my face, I'll just get back up and try something else. And to be a director that can cultivate a space that allows for play in something that feels so obviously what our career needs and what a rehearsal room would demand. But if you, as an actor, feel like you have to prove yourself and there's an element of like nerves in that way, which if an yeah, I think a good director helps break down some of those barriers. You know, we all still, as an actor, might have those in certain ways, but that they can be a leader who just creates a welcoming room of varying perspectives and creative voices.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. What would you say to a student who's watching this, or maybe not, but a student who says, "Hey, I might be interested in directing," and they come to you and they say, what how would I get started, or what advice do you have for someone who might be interested in pursuing that path?"
I think that it's helpful to talk to other directors. Directing can be such an isolating field because you're the only one in the room and it feels competitive, right? We're all just trying to get the next gig. And so if you're not really connecting with other directors, you're trying to focus on your path. Whereas an actor, it is competitive, but you're also then in an ensemble. And so then you're making friends with other actors or you see them at auditions and such. So I think connecting with other directors is important and asking to observe rehearsal processes. I think, you know, you can always send an email. My big thing is I like just send an email. The worst they can do is not respond. And the best they can do is respond. And even better, they can agree to a coffee date or letting you observe a rehearsal process. And especially as a student, I feel like people are really excited to support younger generations and wanting to open up rooms so they can see what processes are like. And surprise, the stuff that you're doing in high school, it doesn't change too much when you get into the professional world. Like there are plenty of things in the professional world where I was like, okay, well, if now I'm doing something at this Lord Theater, it's going to be so different. And I'm so excited. What is it going to be like? And I'm like, oh, this is the same as this like smaller production I did. Like it's still tech, it's still this, yeah, it's still people coming together to put on a show. And just knowing that it's not as scary and like far off as it seems. And I think starting to read scripts. If you're interested about directing, read a lot of scripts. See what scripts you are drawn to and why you're drawn to those. Do the scripts have similar themes or similar storytelling styles? And then within those kind of collection of scripts, read it and start thinking about like, what would this look like on its feet? How can I envision it being on its feet? And seeing the ways that unlocks different ideas for you. And then maybe getting in a room with some friends and being like, let's just like read this play and eat some pizza. Like, let's just sit around the table and read it and talk about it and be the one leading the conversation, like a book club, but for a play. And I feel like that's how directors lead table work. And so there's just different things where you can kind of build those skills in that way of leading a play reading table work session and then maybe being like, get on your feet and let's just like read it and walk around. If you have a group of friends that are interested in that and can kind of explore what it is to direct and act some scenes. And that will all be really useful information to keep with you and pursue. But there's no right or wrong way to do things. I think that's the biggest thing. Like we all have our own paths and what's meant for you won't pass you by.
Yeah, I love that. And I want to circle back to something that you said that feels really resonant and very important. All of it's very important, but it just feels like important to sort of say again, which is, um, theater is theater in all of its like beautiful iterations, right? Like, theater on Broadway is not necessarily any better or more important than like what the community theater down the street or like what you're doing with your friends in a rehearsal room is, right? Last year, my husband and I went to go see An Enemy of the People on Broadway because one of our friends was making their Broadway debut, and we got to go backstage after the show to see our friend. And when we were going backstage, like the crew was just like sweeping up ice off the stage, and like it was the same theater that we do here in DC, right? Like it was the same thing, just a different venue, different space. And so I want to make sure that we really say that again, right? Like theater can be so many different things, and you don't have to be a professional regional theater director or a Broadway director to get a lot of these skills and this experience in a way that's still rings true to the art form, right? And like the profession.
Yeah, yeah. And I think one of the things is, especially doing college theater, where I've been adjunct faculty at two universities. And so I'm seeing a lot of the university theater and being a part of it. And they're like, oh, I can't believe the set's not done yet. Or, there's all these things. And I was like surprised. So many of the like regional theaters I've worked at, they're like, we're behind on the scenic design and the paint, and we don't have this unit. And I'm like, that's not going to go away when you graduate. That actually is very common. And so there's plenty of things like that where you're like, it's just still a bunch of artists getting in a room together and creating, which is what you're doing now, which is what they're doing then. And yeah.
That's such a good lesson to be like all the theater. It's the same process with different moving parts, right? And like
Yeah. And
it's
different budgets.
and different budgets.
Yeah.
Very, very true. Very much heard. Yeah. Oh gosh. But I do remember being in college and being like, and when we're in the professional world, week will be the smoothest thing ever because everyone has lots of money. And then you get in the world and you're like, no, this is actually just the exact same thing I've been doing
Yeah,
for
yeah.
this whole time.
Except they provide a tech snack table usually.
Yes.
Something that is, I've noticed where I'm like, wow, this is a great tech snack table. It's like craft services for TV film, that wasn't around for other productions. But it's not always the big theaters that do that. I've definitely been at like a summer stock theater that has a great tech snack table, and then another theater that doesn't have anything, and another theater that pays for everyone's dinner on the dinner break. Like there's such a wide range of experiences, big or small, wherever you go. And it's just, you can really tell then it's important of like what the community of that specific theater is, right? Big or
Mhm.
small. It's like, what is the heart behind that theater and their mission, and being a part of theaters that you feel aligned with their heart and mission.
Yeah, that's a really great button to the conversation, it feels like, right? Because that goes back to what you said at the beginning, which is all about creating community and
Yeah.
creating collaboration and making spaces where people feel welcome. And it feels like how theaters may or may not curate a tech process can just be a small part of that larger conversation, right? It's like what the feeling is that we're facilitating. So I want to go ahead.
Just right off of that, which then directly impacts the way it ripples out into the greater community. Because if that theater is valuing its artists and the storytelling and the ways that it's, expanding outward and bringing people into the theater, because people aren't seeing theater. Like there's not a lot of people seeing theater, but the people that are seeing theater are the theaters that are bringing their community in and making it a part of the ecosystem of that space beyond the theater walls. And that is so important to me. And so this idea of like, if you're nurturing a community because you care about your bigger community and the stories you're telling and the ways it can speak to a larger conversation, and theater shouldn't be just for people that are like-minded. Like it should be bringing everybody in so that way you spark conversations, because the best is when people walk out and it's not that people are like, I loved that. That was so great. I love when I walk out and hear people in the bathroom line and they're like, I don't know what I think about this. And what about that? And that this. And the other person's like, oh, good point. But I really liked this part of it. And it's like, yes, you're still talking about it. And that's what matters. It's something that leaves you talking and thinking rather than just being like, okay, now to bed I go. Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, look, Great British Bake Off holds a special place in my heart, but it's a very different experience, right? Than watching something that leaves you with a lot to contend with and think about after the fact.
Mhm.
Um, so we've covered a lot of
Yeah.
topics, which is really exciting and great because I think directing is can be so all encompassing in a lot of ways that speaks to a truthfulness in this conversation. Um, I want to make sure before we sort of pause and end, is there anything about directing that you think we haven't talked about or that you really want someone to know? And the answer can be no. But I just want to leave space to be like, we couldn't have covered everything. So if there's anything you want to make sure is out there, now's the time.
I think one thing I'll say is imposter syndrome is real at any age. And that's not even specific to directing, but I think as a director, when you're stepping into the role that is the primary leader in the space for all of those elements, and there's so much of the success of the show, that weight on your shoulders, it can feel overwhelming. And I just want to echo that there are so many directors and artists that I speak with at varying levels in their career that have that same feeling of like, I don't know if I can do this, or oh, this is it's so scary, or I'm not good enough, or blah, 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 blah. And those just kind of like bad voices in our heads. And to know that like a lot of people, even the biggest, bravest looking artists out there that we maybe admire or inspire to be like, they have those same voices. And so it's about like having people around you that help quiet those voices and trusting your artistry and your skill set and knowing that there are going to be different challenges, but they're all opportunities to grow. And nothing is a mistake or a failure, but an opportunity to grow. And so I think that's what I would kind of end with that, at any age, you're still going to kind of feel every time there's a new project. I think I specifically sometimes feel it as a choreographer. I get a new project and I'm like, oh, I don't know how to choreograph. This is so big. There's so many dances, the style, the this, the people. And then I like get on my feet and start doing pre-production for it. And I'm like, okay, all right, we got something. This is good. And so anytime it's a blank canvas, it feels daunting. And there's different elements of sometimes we're like, I got this. I'm so good at this. And then there's another moment that we're like, oh. So just trusting the process of that and riding the wave and knowing that it's okay to feel that way and to just make sure you surround yourself with people that, like I said already, quiet those voices and that you can trust yourself.
Yeah, I love that. And I love your transparency and clarity around that because I think that it is something that lots of people experience but don't talk about
Yeah.
specifically. So Nikki, now that we're at the end of our time, if folks want to see like what you're doing next or see any of your work, is there a place that they could go to see what you've done?
Yeah, I'm off the grid. I'm not on the socials. But you can go to my website, nikkimirza.com, and I usually update things there so you can stay on track with stuff I've got going on my website.
Great. And I love for you that you're not on social media. I
I love it for me too. Highly recommend all you teenagers get off the grid. It's nice over here.
it's not as scary as it sounds.
It's not. And I used to have it. Not like I wasn't super involved with social media, but it's totally fine and I'm still like still have a career without it. It's not required, so
Yeah, but visit that website. There's lots of
yes.
great stuff to look at. Well, Nikki, thank you so much for this great conversation. It was a delight to have you, and I'm sure that the students are going to learn a lot from your brilliant expertise.
Oh, thank you so much, Lindsay.